Hey there, this is the real Jason Duncan, and the question is, am I a spiritualpreneur? That's a term that was coined by a host of another podcast called the Successful Spiritualpreneur Podcast with Christian Maurer. And I had the pleasure of being a guest on his show recently, and we talk about some of this stuff and how my spirituality and my faith play into what I do as an entrepreneur, and a little bit about my story. We originally recorded this in August of 2025, and my team and I thought it would be a good idea to release this as a special episode here on The Root of All Success. I hope you enjoy it.
What's up, beautiful people? This is Christian from the Successful Spiritualpreneur Podcast, and today I'm super excited to have Jason Duncan on the show. He is the founder and CEO of the Exeter Club, a mastermind designed to help high-level entrepreneurs break free from the grind and scale their businesses. He's also the best-selling author of Exit Without Exiting and the host of the Root of All Success podcast. Known as America's Exit Coach, Jason specializes in helping entrepreneurs step away from daily operations without losing ownership or profits. Jason's mission is to help entrepreneurs build businesses around their lives, not the other way around. And he does that with using his strategy and XOS method. He helps business owners create systems that allow their business to thrive independently. Clients who follow Jason's methods have reduced work hours by 30%, increased productivity by 80%, and boosted business value by 30% as well. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Glad to be here, Christian. Thank you.
Yes, honored to have you on. My first question to you would be, because I think you're such a great embodiment of a spiritualpreneur, whether you call yourself like that or no. I think you might be a little bit more entrepreneurial than spiritual, but oftentimes these values are quite connected and it might not be that apparent to people. But what's your definition of a spiritualpreneur?
I thought about this getting ready for today's show, and it's an interesting phrase, spiritual entrepreneur, because I look at myself as someone who has known Jesus my entire life. My parents raised me in the church, and there's never been a moment where that wasn't part of my reality and part of what I embrace in my faith. So for me, being spiritual and specifically being a follower of Christ has been a part of my journey all through my life, whether I was in ministry work, which I did for a while, whether I was in school teaching, running traditional businesses, or now as a mastermind leader, a coach, author, and a podcaster. So for me, being an entrepreneur and also being spiritual, they just intertwine. There is not a separation. It's kind of like this idea that I disagree with work-life balance. I don't use that phrase because I think work is part of life. And so there's no balance between something that's already part of the thing that you're talking about. So I believe the same thing about spiritual entrepreneur. For me, I am spiritual and I'm an entrepreneur. So to me, they're one and the same because of who I am as an individual.
Yeah, I love that. And I think a lot of times people, they try to pull things apart. It's like in science, you try to split off the atom, or you try to split off the work and the life and the spiritual from the entrepreneur. But ultimately, we're like a spiritual being in a human body, right? So we're trying, works. We're one. We're connected, everything's connected. We always try to, human beings to, again, split everything up. But I think the beauty comes from when we actually start to accept our internal wholeness and create from that space. And I feel you've done that in your life so, elegantly. So tell us a little bit more about, your journey, how come you are where you are? What were maybe some milestones we say, yeah, this was one situation in my life that really determined the trajectory of where I am right now, and just maybe a little milestone journey for us.
I started off my career in really my senior year of high school, then all through college, and for the next decade as a minister, as a vocational minister, working as a pastor in churches. And that was what I believed at the time was my calling, what I wanted to do in life. And I did, and I enjoyed it until I didn't. And it was time to get out. I was like, I can't do this anymore. So I went back to college. I got a master's in education and started teaching school because I wanted to still make a difference. I loved teaching. I loved being around people. And I wanted to do something where I could have good influence on people. But I didn't want to babysit adults who should know better. So teaching 8th grade American history was the thing I chose to do. And I fell in love with that. Christian, I loved doing it. And I would still be doing it today, except for the fact that the budget cuts in my district required them to cut teaching positions in every building. And I was the last guy hired in my building. And so I was on the chopping block. It didn't matter that I was a very good teacher, had the highest test scores in all of the county for my subject matter, but that's how they made the decision. So that was a huge, it was a terrible day when I got that news that my contract was not going to be renewed. And what I thought was terrible ended up leading me to become an entrepreneur. And I ultimately, it wasn't an immediate decision, but ultimately decided to start a business. And that business, I went from unemployed school teacher to millionaire in just a few short years. And that journey was pretty amazing. And then in 2019, 2020, I decided to make a step out of running my business that had grown and been a very successful business to move into more of the coaching aspect, because I really missed teaching. I missed guiding. I missed working with people, more than just selling products and services. I wanted to work with people. And I started the mastermind, the Exeter Club, and we launched in October of 2021. And we had our first meeting officially in January of 2022. And it has been the joy of my life. It's kind of the culmination of everything I've done. I mean, I get to use and exercise some of my pastoral gifts. Although it's not a Christian mastermind, I do not promote it as such, but I also get to use my teaching gifts. And then I get to use all of the experience that I had from starting that business. And I've started 14 companies. So I've got this opportunity to tap into all the experiences of my life. Wow. And do exactly what I believe that God put me on this earth to do. And that's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. And just for, the listeners who aren't as familiar with, what your businesses were, like, what was the first one you really was like your first big ones? You was like, wow, I really made it with that one. And then what were other industries, just so we can get a little bit of like a gauge on, okay, what you're familiar with, what industries you've worked in.
Well, the true story is back in 1995, I got married in May of that year, and I was a part-time youth minister at a church that year. And I wasn't making that much money. I think $1,200 a month is all I was making. And so I needed to supplement my income. And I went to this conference on how to make money from home. And I ended up leaving that conference with the idea to start a business. And I started a business designing websites of all things in 1995. If you think about the timing of that, the World Wide Web was a baby. It was brand new. Wow. Most people didn't know what a website was. They hadn't heard of the internet, didn't know what it was. So I started that, but I wasn't an entrepreneur. I wasn't a business owner. I was just doing it out of sheer desperation to make money. It lasted maybe 6 months. It was my first foray into business ownership, but not really, because I didn't have enough maturity or knowledge to understand what the heck I was doing. Now, I didn't attempt again to start any other business until 2010. And in 2010, a friend of mine came to me. I was teaching school quite happily. And a friend of mine said, hey, let's start this company. I've got an idea to do hydrogen generators for cars. And I'm like, what? Are you nuts? Like, I don't know anything about this. This is insane to me. But he convinced me to do it. And we started the company, and it was interesting. I was still teaching with no intent to ever leave. And then that following spring is when I found out my contract was not going to get renewed. And we had the company, it was running, it wasn't making any money. And we'd already set everything up. The LLC was set up. We had a presence online, not very good, but we had a presence. And I thought, well, how can I make money with this? If I don't have a teaching job, how do I make money with this? Because this hydrogen thing won't work. And that's when I decided to pivot the company into LED lighting. So at the time, it was brand new. Nobody really knew much about LED lighting. So we got into it early. And we rode that wave and created, like I said, a multi-million-dollar company. And then since then, I've started funding companies and real estate investing companies, hard money lending companies, e-commerce. I've done a little bit of all those things. But today, what I'm running and I spend 90% of my time on is my company, the Exeter Club. And I just work with my clients.
Very cool. Let's say there's someone in the audience that is around 35, 40, and their district has a budget cut. God bless the budget cuts. And imagine, what would you, I don't know, where would you tell people to start? Let's say they're a teacher or somewhere out there working 9 to 5, and they're just getting laid off, 35, 40 years old. What? How would you guide them?
Well, every person's situation is different. I mean, at the time for me, My wife was working full time at a financial advisory firm, and we were making collectively, I think between the two of us, maybe 80 grand a year. So we really weren't making that much money. But she was making probably a little more than half of that than I was. I think I was making 38 grand a year as a teacher. And we had 2 kids. We had a mortgage. We had a couple of car payments, maybe a credit card. I think some student loan debt left over. So we were living the normal American life. We weren't hand to mouth. We weren't paycheck. Well, I guess technically we were paycheck to paycheck. We couldn't miss many, but we were okay. Well, when that happened, I had to make a decision, like as the provider for the family, I need to make sure I made enough money for that. So I can't in a vacuum say, well, if you're 35, 40 years old and you get laid off, here's what you should do, because I don't know what your situation is. If you have no debt, no family, no nothing like that, what I would tell that person to do is very, very different than what I would tell somebody in my situation where you got a family and kids. I think playing it safe is a little better and more practical, and probably serves your family better than just going off the deep end. Now, I happen to have, when I started the company, I had a cushion of income coming in from the state because my last paycheck wasn't going to be till August 15th. So I made a decision that spring and all through the summer. I said, look, babe, I told my wife, I said, I'm going to run this company and do as much as I can to make this work. We don't really need any money. So I don't need income because we have money coming in. But August, that's the cliff. So if I don't have anything happen between now and then, I will go get a real job. I'll work at Lowe's. I'll work at Home Depot. I'll work at Starbucks. Whatever. I'll just make some money to help pay the bills. Well, on August the 12th, 3 days before my self-imposed deadline, I got on the elevator at a regional hospital, rode to the 3rd floor conference room, and made the pitch of a lifetime. And it was an LED lighting project where we were going to retrofit all of their lighting in the whole hospital to LED, and it was going to save them like $280,000 a year in energy costs. And the guy, this is a funny story. So the guy who was the chief, the CFO was there, but the guy who was the main facility guy looks across me. He stops me about 2/3 of the way through my presentation, and he says, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yeah, sure." He said, "Has anybody ever told you no?" Now, the reality was this is my first pitch. So the true answer is no. Nobody's ever told me no. So that's what I told him. I said, "No, sir, nobody's ever told me no." I didn't tell him that I never asked before, but I said, "Nobody's ever told me no." And then he looked at me again. He said, "Well, why wouldn't I do this?" I mean, it really didn't make any sense not to do it because he was going to save more money than it was going to cost to do it. And I said, "I don't know. Why wouldn't you do it?" And then he looked at the CFO who was sitting at the other end of the table. And then he looked back at me and he said, "Do you trust these guys?" And so there's me and my business partner sitting here at the table. We're green. It's obvious. We kind of know what we're talking about, but we're not 100%. And then the CFO says, "Yeah, I trust him." And he said, "Write the man a check." So the guy before we left that day wrote me an $18,000 check as a deposit to get started on some preliminary work. But that project, Christian, turned out to be a $2.3 million project over the course of the next 3 years. That's how I got into entrepreneurship. And that is a true story.
Amazing. I love that. That's a great story. I love that. So tell us a little bit more about you being, America's exit coach. Like, how can people think a little bit more of their business as they actually want to exit it? Because a lot of times people start something out of their passion or because they love it so much, but they never really think about the exit because it's like far away, or I love it so much I don't even want to exit. But tell us more about that philosophy, around that exit strategy. Or even
I think it was 2016, 2017, I hired a business coach for the very first time. And, the company was doing fairly well. We'd cracked multi-millions in revenue, and we had decent net profit. And then it was in 2018 when we cracked $1 million in EBITDA for the first time. And so I didn't really enjoy the business. It wasn't that I loathed it or hated it. It's just, I just didn't enjoy it. I liked working with my employees. I liked most of my clients. There wasn't anything wrong with it, but I only did that because it was the thing at the time that I thought would work, LED lighting. Well, I didn't really particularly care for LED lighting. I understood it better than 90% of the people I knew, but I didn't really want to do that. I would much rather run a motorcycle dealership or a car dealership or something that I enjoyed. And so I sat down with my business coach and I told him, hey man, I think I want to sell the company. What do you think? And he said, you can't. And I said, what do you mean? We got $1 million in profit. We're doing great. We got, 15, 20 employees. We're working all over the country. Things are good. He goes, the reason you want out is the same reason no one will want in. And it shook me because I thought, well, he's right. I mean, I didn't say he was right immediately because I disagreed with him, but as I started thinking about it, nobody would want to have bought that because everything ran through me. I was the hub around which everything turned. And even though I wasn't doing the dailies, I wasn't selling necessarily, I wasn't running admin or finances, everything still filtered back through me. I was an owner manager. I wasn't an owner operator. I was an owner manager. And he said, nobody's going to pay you for that. Nobody's going to pay for that. They're going to give you such a discount that you would be better off just figuring another way. So I did figure another way. And that's where I wrote the book, Exit Without Exiting, is I figured out how to get out of the daily operations without selling the company. And as I did that over the course of the next couple of years, it started working, and I wasn't working daily in the business at all. And people started asking, hey, Jason, did you sell the company? No, I didn't. Well, what do you do every day? Well, I exited. Well, I thought you didn't exit. Well, I exited without exiting. And so that phrase just kind of came up over and over and over again. And people started asking, well, can you show me how to do that? Can you show me how to do that? So over time, through the mistakes I made in that process, because my exit worked until it didn't. And then I had some bad characters come in and did some things that I didn't see what they were doing. And the company ended up, I ended up losing that company. Honestly, the truth is, but as I went through that process and then starting and exiting some other companies in various levels of success, people kept asking me, well, how do you do it? Well, how do you make sure that you don't make the mistake that you made? How do you do these things? And so that just became the thing that people started asking me about. So today I consider myself America's exit coach. Am I the guy that's going to take you and go figure out how to get a multiple on private equity and do A, B, and C, rounds and seed round? No, but the average guy running a $3 to $50 million company in the US, if you want to learn how to get yourself out of the weeds of operations, build your multiple so that it goes up to a place that makes sense, and then maybe set up a business to provide you passive income for the rest of your life, I can show you how to do that.
I love that. Wonderful. Yeah. Where can people learn more about that to join a coaching mastermind or a group of yours?
The easiest place to do would be just go to my website, theexiterclub.com. That's the Exiter, EXITER club.com. And there's videos and information and testimonials that talk about who we are and what we do as a club. And then if that's interesting to you, you can book a call with me or one of my exit and growth advisors, and we can sit down and talk with you about what your situation is and then tell you how the club works. We have 6 coaches in our program. So it's not just me. You're not just going to be talking to one guy. You're going to get an attorney, a CPA, a wealth advisor, a mindset coach, an investment banker. All of these people you get access to them too, so that you can figure out how to build the value in your business and get yourself out of the owner operator or owner manager status.
Beautiful. How do you ensure, because a lot of these businesses in that size, especially I think, are still again tied to kind of the founder's values, the culture of basically yourself, right? How do you ensure that culture stays great or tied to what clients are used to, what the company represents? How do you maintain authenticity?
You have to make sure that the foundation is built correctly. The foundation of anything is what makes it stand or what makes it fall. And so building the culture of a company takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of intentionality. And as a founder, you are the one in charge of the culture. You set the culture, you set the tone for the business. And I would say up until about 20 employees, not only do you set it, you control it. And you can, because if you're actively in the business, you can start controlling. Once you get past 20 employees, even if you're actively in the business, the company starts taking on its own culture based on the foundation that has been created. So if you're a jerk, if you expect you have high expectations and little patience for people, if you treat people as expendable, which I know people who do that. If those are the things you do, as you grow, the company grows and you step away, your managers are going to treat people the way you treated them. They're never going to exceed your ability. They're not going to exceed the way you treated them. So you have to build a foundation of culture the right way, and then you can pull out. So if you do that the right way, that's not to mean you won't have problems from time to time, but it's more likely to succeed than otherwise. I mean, you look at the culture of the huge companies today, the culture of Apple, the culture of Google, the culture of Tesla or Amazon, the big darlings of the entrepreneurial world. The culture in those companies has remained steady pretty much the whole time without the founder's involvement. But that doesn't mean the founder didn't spend, years and sleepless nights making sure that the foundation was built. And then you got other companies where the owner or the founder steps away and the company tanks. Well, that's because they built a bad foundation and they made it all about them and not about the company.
Beautiful. I love that. Can you tell us a story about like maybe a client that you had or somebody who ran through XOS or, one of your past clients that just like, yeah, he was this guy, I think it's good to like illustrate an example.
So one of the coolest stories we've had in a long time is we had a gentleman named Matt, and he joined the Exeter Club not quite a year ago, and his company was already listed for sale with a broker, and he wasn't getting any bites, and nothing was moving, and he was anxious to go ahead and get it sold, and he read my book, and so he reached out to me directly after reading my book, and he said, "Hey, I read your book. I think you can help me. Here's my situation." And I said, "Okay, well, tell me why you want to sell right now. Cause why you want to sell is as important as anything else." And he said, "Well, I'm getting on a boat. I bought a cabin on a boat that's going to be sailing around the world for 3 years. And we leave next August." And like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, that's my deadline. I gotta figure this out." And I said, "Well, look, I can't promise you anything. I doubt there's any way that we can figure out how to get your company retooled and marketable by August. It's just probably not possible." Now, here's what's happened. He, after learning the exit without exiting methodology and the mindset and the XOS method, he decided to delist it, to pull it down. He said, "Look, I can run this from my laptop in a boat on the other side of the world, and I could still make the money. I don't need to sell it. And when I get back off my tour, the company's still going. I can step back in. I can get it, do whatever, and then I can sell it. But in the meantime, he can make money and not be present." He says, "I don't really need to sell it." So he sent me a message on Saturday and said he was heading from California to Tokyo and taking the bullet train to Hiroshima, and then he was hopping on the boat. He was going to be gone. I'm like, this is the best story ever. I love this. But that is an illustration of, people come to me all the time. They say, "Well, look, you're an exit coach. I want you to help me exit the company." Okay, we can do that. We have investment bankers and M&A attorneys that we can get you set up and we could get you exited. But more often than not, people say, "Oh, well, why would I sell? If I'm pulling in 2, 3, 4, 500, maybe $1 million a year personally out of this business, why sell it? If I can figure out how to make this thing run and I don't have to be here." That's passive income. In the United States, there are laws and tax laws to our advantage. If you're doing less than 750 hours a year in that business, it's counted as passive income. And so if your business is throwing off $1 million in passive income to you, I mean, think about the tax savings, where if you sold the company, you might have to give the government half of your money. So I'm not a tax advisor, and that's not tax advice, but there are ways that you can do this that most people don't think about.
Yeah, I love that. And imagine all the, what's a good way to put this? The karma saved in a way. You know what I mean? Like you help someone retain instead of like just like a one-off big sell, whatever it is. But you help someone. He's super happy he still has it. He's gonna serve him for many, many years to come. It's like it's great work.
Yeah.
You do for people.
Absolutely. I love it. And that's why I love it so much. I can't imagine doing anything else.
Beautiful. I love that. And when people come to you, what do they usually like when you look at businesses across the board that you've advised and coached and guided, like what do they usually lack? Is it just systems, or is it oftentimes it's system and culture that like what's across the board that you'd say, if somebody's there now, like make sure this is kind of it, or make sure you focus on the culture now versus, in 5-10 years,
I think the thing that most people lack is the mindset required to step away from daily operations. Most entrepreneurs have the hero syndrome. And that means they want to swoop in and save the day. They love being the one that people ask the questions to, and they love being there to solve problems and being the hero. And that's awesome at first. You have to be the hero at first. But past 6 months or 12 months in the business, if you're still a hero, if you're a single point of failure, you're like a perfect restaurant that only has one table. You cannot grow. Like that, it doesn't matter how good the ingredients, how good the food is, how good the service is. If your restaurant only has one table, you're limited to serving the amount of people that you can pay attention to at one table, which is not much. So when you're the one hero of the business, you limit the business's scalability by your ability to provide those services. So we've got to get your restaurant built with multiple tables. We got to have as many tables as possible. So no single points of failure. And so the thing that most people lack is that mindset. And that's one thing we work on. That's why we have a mindset coach in our program, is that we want people to think you don't have to be the hero. You cannot be the hero. You have to step back and let other people step into those roles and train them up to let them run the daily operations so that you can back away, because the business for you should be an asset. It shouldn't be a job.
I love that. That's really great advice. And I think anybody who's listening can, empathize with that, because we've all been there. Like I feel we all as entrepreneurs, we just start out at this one table where everything is just perfect, like the glasses, the cutlery, the plates, the dishes, the ingredients, but then like, okay, what now? I want to grow, but I can't, right? Because you haven't stepped out of this role,
That's right.
Beautiful. Well, we're coming towards the end of the episode. I'd love to ask you some personal questions that, are, that I'm interested in regards to your, inspiration and like what keeps you going. Like, so currently in your life, like who or what inspires you most, like in your entrepreneurial journey?
It's interesting about my life is that I've never had one single mentor or hero that I admired. Not in my ministry work, not in my teaching work, and not in my entrepreneurial career, and not even now as a coach. But it's been a mix of really good coaches that I've had. I've got a great coach now that I work with, and he's been a very good mentor and advisor to me. I've got some good godly friends around me that help me through some good and bad times. And I had a friend call me today. He's dealing with some pretty gnarly stuff personally and financially, and he just needed an ear to bend and get some advice. And I've had people like that in my life when I've needed that, and to make those good decisions. But if I had to name someone whose teachings have really shaped me, I would say that it would be Napoleon Hill, who is the author of Think and Grow Rich, the author of Outwitting the Devil. This guy studied for 20 years some of the most successful people in the world and tried to figure out what made them tick. Now, he himself was a flawed man just like any of us, and he didn't practice even the things that he taught a lot of times. But he was able to uncover and specify, these are the things that make people successful. These habits, these mindsets. And so I'm a big fan. As a matter of fact, just over the last year, I got my leadership certification from the Napoleon Hill Foundation. I'm a big fan. I don't revere him as a guru or a saint, but I do admire the teachings. And of course, it goes without saying that Jesus obviously is the greatest teacher ever. And without him and his guidance, I wouldn't be anything.
I love that. Someone who's also really interested in Napoleon Hill is Russell Brunson from Clinton. Like he went to the library, or like where some of his old archives were. I think it's Arkansas or something like that.
No, it's in Virginia, in Wise, Virginia. That's as a matter of fact, I was just there speaking at their national event last month.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's fascinating, especially like there's so much like legacy that we just forget, especially like the younger generation. It's like, I don't know what was popular in the 1920s and 1940s, or Ernest Holmes, like stuff. It just gets forgotten so easily, because you like follow, I don't know, Mr. Beast and the School of Hard. What I mean? It's just like the younger guys, but there's like certain wisdom and succinctness that comes from, I think, a more ancient generation.
Agreed. I find myself reading books now and over the past 3 or 4 years that were written in the late 1800s and early 1900s than anything else. I think we've lost a lot of the knowledge that these people were connected more deeply to the way the world works and the way money works. And, Florence Shen as an author, she was a contemporary of Napoleon Hill, wrote in the 1920s. I don't know that they knew each other, but they lived about the same time, and she wrote on some of the same topics. And there's other authors, Wallace Wattles, who wrote The Science of Getting Rich. He had his demons and issues, but he understood things that modern people don't understand or talk about. So I think that there's a lot of these ancient wisdom. I say ancient; they're not really ancient. They're only a little over 100 years old, but they really knew stuff that we didn't, and we've lost it. Bob Proctor was really good at helping bring those things out, and he passed away, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. So we don't have a lot of people. Russell, I'm grateful for. We don't have a lot of people, who are being the bellwether to reach out and say, hey, there's this knowledge, there's this library of knowledge of how the world works, how money works, how your mind works, that we could tap into.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thanks for sharing that. Last question. I always ask people, like, what's your vision of the new earth? Whatever that means to you.
What I believe about what's going to happen when the new heaven and the new earth come is that it's going to be everything that we wish it was, but a lot of what we had no idea and could never anticipate. We say, well, I just wish there was no traffic. Okay, well, there's not going to be any traffic, so that's gone. But there's so many more different layers of how good it is. I mean, just imagine if every person on earth actually followed the golden rule. Regardless of who they believe God is or whatever, if they just followed the golden rule and said, look, I'm going to treat other people the way I want to be treated, how cool would this earth be? Like, I wouldn't ever be in lawsuits. I would never fear somebody stealing from me. I wouldn't fear somebody talking bad about me behind my back. That's part of what I think the new earth is going to be. We're going to have great intent. We're always going to be kind. We're going to be nice. We're going to be forgiving. We're going to give the benefit of the doubt. And I think it's going to be beautiful. It's going to have everything we wish it was and nothing that we don't like.
Yeah. I love that you painting that picture. And I think, humans are pretty basic, you know what I mean? Like, and at the same time could be so much more sophisticated, right? But I think we sometimes get stuck in this, like, living in material world life, right? Yeah. Especially with your family and things like that. Like, this is all great and good. But don't forget that we're all, like, connected, one, to get, like, just make it a little bit more aware in your daily life, I think is a great reminder. And same, paints the same picture. I mean, if everybody would see each other, it's just like, hey, you're my brother, you're my sister. It's like, what kind of world would this be?
Yeah. Well, there's a book. I can't remember the author. Let me see if it's here on my desk. Don't see it immediately, but it's called Happy Pocket Full of Money. Have you ever heard of this book? You know what I'm talking about? Somebody told me about it, and it sounds, obviously the title is much more about money than the actual book. The book really is very little about money. It's really about what you just talked about, Christian, about how we're all connected, that we're all one, and that when we understand and embrace that there's no barriers to what we can accomplish, whether it be the pursuit of wealth or generational wealth or anything else. And it's pretty deep. It's a pretty deep book. The hook is that's about money, but it really isn't about money. And but if you haven't read it, I think it would be something you would enjoy.
Beautiful. I appreciate that. I'm gonna order it. It's funny because it's like in sales, like give people what they want and get them what they need. It's like, yeah, sometimes you just have to like get their mind hooked to something, but actually give them like, I never thought about it that way. Yeah. So thanks for sharing that. Well, welcome. So thank you so much for being on the show. Guys, check out The Real Jason Duncan jasonduncan.com. And anywhere else where people can stay in touch with you, social or mainly website?
Yeah, if you just look me up on anything, ChatGPT, Google, whatever, if you just look up The Real Jason Duncan, you're going to find me.
I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for, sharing your wisdom, sharing your heart with us today. And thanks for all you do and are.
Thank you, man.
All right.
Attention business owners. Attention business owners. Feeling burnout from running your business? Uncertain if you're nearing burnout? Take our free 10-question business burnout test at businessburnouttest.com to discover where you stand. With just 10 quick questions, you'll learn how to immediately begin making changes to regain freedom and success. Cut your daily operations time in half. Improve your quality of life and prepare your business for your future exit without losing revenue or profit. Visit businessburnouttest.com now and take the test. Thank you for listening to another edition of The Root of All Success with the real Jason Duncan. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, visit therootofallsuccess.com to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Follow Jason on social media at The Real Jason Duncan. See you again next time here on The Root of All Success.